Caleb Turner woke before sunrise, just as he always did. The ranch was quiet. Only the soft sound of wind moving across the open land. He pulled on his boots, took a sip of cold water, and stepped outside. The storm last night had pushed down one part of his old wooden fence, and he wanted to fix it before the cattle wandered off. It felt like a normal morning, the kind he had lived many times since his wife passed away. He expected nothing unusual, only work and silence. As he walked across the yard, he saw something strange near the far end of the fence. A dark shape, still and small, leaned awkwardly against one of the posts. At first he thought it was a piece of loose cloth, caught by the wind. But as he moved closer, his steps slowed. That wasn't cloth. It was a person. His heart tightened. He walked the last few feet more carefully, every sense alert. When he finally reached the broken fence, he stopped completely. Unable to believe what he was seeing, a young Apache woman sat on the ground, her back resting weakly against the wood. Her hands were bound with old metal shackles, fixed tightly around her wrists, and a short chain connected them to a bent nail hammered into the fence post. The sight made Caleb's chest grow heavy. She looked exhausted, covered in dust, and her hair hung in long, tangled strands. It was clear she had been out there for hours, maybe the whole night. Before he could speak, her eyes opened. They were dark, frightened, and filled with confusion. She stared at him, as if she was expecting the worst. Her lips trembled as she tried to talk, and her voice came out broken and weak. "Do whatever you want," she whispered, her throat dry, her breathing unsteady. "Just don't hurt me more." Caleb felt something sharp twist inside him, pain mixed with anger. Not at her, but at whoever had done this. He crouched down slowly, making sure not to move too close too fast. He knew she was terrified. Anyone in her situation would be. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said gently. "I didn't do this to you. I just found you here." She watched him with wide, scared eyes. Even though he spoke softly, she flinched every time he shifted his weight or reached toward the chains. Caleb kept his voice calm, warm, steady. He wanted her to feel safe enough to breathe. He examined the shackles without touching her skin. The chains were old, rusty, and tight. Whoever tied her here had used whatever metal they could find, clearly not caring if it injured her. Her wrists were red and swollen, marked by dried blood that made Caleb's stomach tighten again. This wasn't a simple accident. Someone had left her here purposely and cruelly. "I'm going to free you," he said, slowly. "All right? I won't hurt you." She didn't resist, but she looked confused, as if she had never heard such words from anyone before. Caleb reached for his small knife, keeping his movements slow so she didn't panic. It wasn't strong enough to cut metal, but he could pry the bent nail loose from the fence. He worked carefully, keeping his hands steady even as the sharp metal scraped his fingers. The woman kept watching him, every breath shallow, expecting at any second that he might suddenly turn unkind. But he didn't. He stayed quiet and gentle, focused on breaking the chain free. After several minutes, he felt the nail shift. With a final tug, it came loose from the wood. The chain dropped slightly, and she gasped softly, surprised that she could move her arms even a little. She didn't try to run. She barely had the strength to lift her hands from her lap. Caleb wasn't finished. The shackles still held her wrists. He tried to bend the old metal with his knife and hands, but it wouldn't open. He knew he needed the small tool in his cabin that he used to repair his barn locks. But before leaving her, he spoke in a calm voice again. "I'm going to bring something to get these off," he said. "I'll be right back. I'm not leaving you here." She seemed unsure how to react. Her eyes followed him as he stood and walked quickly to the cabin. The entire time, he felt a weight on his back, like her fear was pressing against him, even from far behind. He grabbed his toolbox and hurried back. When he returned, he saw her head leaning forward, her eyes half closed. She looked as if she might faint at any moment. Caleb carefully sat down near her, again keeping a safe distance so she wouldn't feel trapped. He used the small metal tool to loosen the first shackle. The metal resisted, but he kept adjusting the pressure, working with patience. Finally, the clasp opened halfway. Her wrist slipped out with a soft sound, and she gasped again. This time from relief. Her hand trembled as she brought it close to her chest, rubbing the area where the metal had dug into her skin. Caleb moved to the second shackle, repeating the same careful process. The woman watched him with cautious eyes, her expression slowly changing from fear to something softer, confusion, maybe even a small spark of hope. The last metal piece came off with a click, and she let out a breath she had been holding for too long. Her hands were free, but she didn't move. She didn't stand. She didn't run. She simply stared at the open shackles on the ground, unable to believe she was no longer trapped. "You're free now," Caleb said gently. "But you're weak. You need rest." When he reached toward her shoulder to help her stand, she froze. He stopped immediately and pulled his hand back. "It's all right," he said softly. "I won't touch you without asking. Do you want help getting up?" She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no clear words came out. Instead, she nodded slowly. Caleb placed his hands lightly under her arms, lifting her as carefully as he could. Her legs shook, unable to hold her weight, and she collapsed again. Caleb caught her before she hit the ground, supporting her gently. "Easy," he said. "You're exhausted." Her head rested weakly against his arm for a moment. She didn't seem afraid now, just tired, as if her body had finally given up after fighting too long. Caleb lifted her in his arms, not roughly, not forcefully, but with the same care he would show someone injured on the road. She weighed little, far less than she should have, and he realized she must have been without food or water for a long time. The walk back to the cabin felt longer than before, though the distance was the same. The land around them was quiet, as if respecting the fragile moment. Caleb pushed the door open with his foot and stepped inside. He laid her gently on the bed near the window. She didn't resist. Her eyes fluttered open, just enough to see where she was, and then closed again. Caleb placed a folded blanket over her and set a cup of water on the table beside the bed. He watched her for a moment, hoping she would wake enough to drink. Her breathing was slow, steady, but tired. She was safe now, but healing would take time. Not wanting to overwhelm her, Caleb stepped outside and closed the door softly behind him. He leaned against the cabin wall, exhaling a long breath. He wasn't sure who had brought her there or why, but he knew one thing for certain. She hadn't deserved any of it. Whoever she was, whatever her past, she needed protection now, not judgment. Caleb looked out across the land as the first golden light of morning touched the fields. He knew his quiet life had changed the moment he saw her chained to his fence, and he also knew he would not turn away from her, not now, not ever. Ayanna woke to the sound of soft crackling. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Her eyes opened slowly, and she saw a wooden ceiling above her. Not the open sky, not the cold ground. She felt a warm blanket over her body and a gentle heat coming from somewhere nearby. The sharp fear she carried for so long rushed back into her chest, and her breath quickened. She tried to sit up but stopped when her vision blurred. Her hands reached toward her wrists out of habit, expecting to feel cold metal biting into her skin again. But there were no shackles, only faint marks where the old metal had pressed too tightly. She stared at her wrists in confusion, unable to believe they were truly free. Then she heard a light step outside the door, and her heart jumped. She looked around quickly, her eyes scanning every corner of the cabin. The place was simple: a wooden table, 2 chairs, a stove with a small fire burning, and tools hanging neatly on the walls. Nothing looked threatening, but she still felt trapped by her own memories. The door opened slowly. Caleb stepped inside carrying a bowl of warm broth and a cup of water. The moment he entered, Ayanna pressed her back against the wall behind the bed, breathing faster. Caleb stopped right at the doorway, surprised but understanding her fear. "It's all right," he said softly. "You're safe here." Ayanna didn't answer. She only stared at him with wide, cautious eyes. Caleb placed the bowl and cup on the table beside the bed, then stepped back several feet to give her space. He didn't approach her, didn't try to touch her, didn't even sit down. He simply stood quietly, letting her see he meant no harm. "I brought you some food," he said. "You don't have to eat now. Just when you're ready." She looked at the bowl, then back at him. The warm smell of the broth filled the air, and her stomach tightened painfully. She hadn't eaten properly in days, maybe longer, but she was afraid to reach for it while he watched. Caleb understood that too. He gave a small nod and stepped toward the door again. "I'll go outside for a bit," he said. "Take your time." He left the cabin without waiting for her reply. For several minutes, Ayanna sat completely still, listening to his footsteps fade. Only when the silence inside the cabin felt real and full did she slowly reach for the cup of water. Her hands shook as she brought it to her lips. The cool water slid down her throat, easing the tightness. She drank carefully, not wanting to choke or draw attention. Then she tasted the broth, and her eyes filled with tears she didn't let fall. Every spoonful warmed her empty stomach. She ate slowly but didn't stop until the bowl was empty. Outside, Caleb chopped wood, pretending not to listen for sounds inside. He wanted her to feel safe without pressure. When he finally returned, he knocked lightly on the door before entering. It was the smallest gesture, but it mattered. He didn't want to surprise her. This time she didn't push herself into the corner. She sat on the bed, the empty bowl resting on the table beside her. She didn't speak, but her eyes no longer held the same sharp fear. There was confusion, yes, and caution, but also a hint of trust starting to form. "Feeling better?" Caleb asked gently. She lowered her gaze and nodded once. Caleb smiled. Not too wide, not too sudden. "Good. You need rest. You've been through something difficult." Ayanna hesitated before finally speaking, her voice barely louder than a whisper. "Why? Why did you free me?" Caleb took a moment before answering. He didn't want to say anything that might frighten her. "Because no one deserves to be left like that," he said, "and because someone did something wrong to you. I couldn't walk away." Her eyes softened, but she still didn't understand his kindness. People in her past treated her like a target or a burden, never like someone who deserved mercy. Caleb didn't push her to talk more. He went to the stove, stirred the fire, and began heating water for tea. Ayanna watched him, unsure what to make of this quiet, gentle man who asked nothing from her. She saw he had placed her belongings, whatever small items she had on her, neatly folded on the table. He hadn't searched through them. He hadn't taken anything. After a long silence, she finally whispered her name. "Ayanna." Caleb turned slightly, surprised she had spoken willingly. "Ayanna," he repeated with respect. "That's a beautiful name." "Mine is Caleb." She looked down at her hands, twisting the blanket between her fingers. Speaking wasn't easy for her. Caleb knew that, so he didn't rush her. When she finally spoke again, her words came slowly, each one weighing something heavy. "There were men, hunters," she said. "They took people from my camp. I ran to find my younger brother and sister, but they caught me. They said they would sell me." Her voice broke, and she closed her eyes tightly as if trying to block out the memory. Caleb's jaw tightened. He felt a hard anger build in his chest, but he kept his expression gentle for her sake. "You're safe from them now," he said. "I won't let them come near you." Ayanna looked at him sharply, surprised by the certainty in his voice. She wasn't used to anyone defending her. Caleb poured tea into a small cup and placed it on the table near her, stepping back again. "If you want to leave when you're strong, I won't stop you," he said. "But until then, you can rest here." Her eyes softened even more. No one had ever given her a choice before. She wasn't used to freedom, or kindness, without conditions. She lifted the teacup slowly, warming her hands against its heat. "You helped me," she whispered. "But the men will come looking. They always come." Caleb shook his head calmly. "Let them come. They won't get you. She stared at him, searching his face for any sign of cruelty or hidden intentions. Instead, she saw only sincerity and quiet strength. It made her heart feel strange, like something heavy inside was slowly loosening. Later in the afternoon, Caleb stepped outside to check the fence again. Ayanna watched him through the small window. The way he moved was steady, strong, but peaceful. He wasn't like the men who hurt others for power. He worked with purpose, not anger. When he returned, she was standing beside the table, holding onto it for balance. Caleb paused in the doorway. "You shouldn't be walking yet," he said gently. "I need to learn to stand again," she replied softly. Caleb nodded. "All right. But take it slow." She took a few steps, shaky but determined. Her legs trembled each time she shifted her weight. Caleb stayed several feet away, watching carefully, but not interfering. She appreciated that more than she could express. As evening came, Caleb prepared a simple meal of vegetables and bread. Ayanna helped by handing him a few items, trying not to feel useless. She didn't speak much, but her silence no longer came from fear. It came from unfamiliar comfort. After they ate, Caleb lit a small lantern. The warm glow filled the cabin with a calm, safe feeling. Ayanna looked around the room again, noticing how quiet and peaceful it was compared to the chaos she had lived through. For the first time in a long while, she felt she might actually sleep without fear. Before leaving her to rest, Caleb spoke softly. "If you need anything, just call. I'll be nearby." Ayanna looked at him for a long moment. Her voice was soft but clear. "Thank you for saving me." Caleb shook his head. "You saved yourself by surviving long enough for someone to find you." She didn't argue, but a small, grateful expression appeared on her face, something gentle and new, something that had not been there before. As Caleb stepped outside and closed the door, Ayanna lay down on the bed. Her body still ached, but her heart felt strangely lighter. She knew she was not safe forever. She knew the hunters might still search for her. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, she felt warmth, comfort, and the faint beginning of trust. And she could not help but wonder why a man who owed her nothing had chosen to protect her as if her life mattered. The next morning began quietly, just like the day before, but a strange tension drifted through the air, something neither Caleb nor Ayanna could see, yet both could feel. Caleb stepped outside early, planning to repair the fence fully now that Ayanna was safe inside the cabin. The sun had barely risen, painting soft orange streaks across the land. Ayanna watched him from the window, holding the cup of warm tea he'd given her. She still felt weak, but her mind was clearer than it had been in days. As Caleb worked, he kept glancing at the ground at the tracks he had noticed near the fence the previous day. They didn't belong to him, and they didn't belong to Ayanna. Someone else had been near his land recently, someone who walked heavily, someone who had dragged the chains. He didn't want to alarm Ayanna, so he hadn't mentioned it yet. But worry tugged at him quietly. Inside, Ayanna moved around slowly, testing her legs again. She still felt dizzy at times, but she was determined not to stay helpless. She folded the blanket neatly, placed the dishes in one corner, and tried to sweep the small cabin floor with a makeshift broom she found behind the door. Simple tasks made her feel grounded, like she was reclaiming a small piece of her life. By mid-morning, Caleb returned to the cabin. When he opened the door, he paused for a moment. Ayanna stood in the kitchen space, looking nervous because he had caught her doing chores. "You shouldn't be pushing yourself yet," he said gently. "I'm only sweeping," she replied quietly. "I want to help. I don't want to sit all day." Caleb could see she meant it. She wasn't trying to impress him. She simply wanted to contribute, even in a small way. "Just don't overwork yourself," he said. "Your body needs time." Ayanna nodded. She didn't argue, but her eyes showed appreciation for the fact that he didn't force her to stop. They shared a quiet lunch, simple bread and boiled vegetables. Ayanna ate slowly, still cautious around him. But she didn't hide her face anymore. She even asked a small question about the ranch, surprising them both. "How long have you lived here?" she asked. Caleb smiled gently. "Most of my life." My father built this cabin. I've taken care of the land since he passed. Ayana listened with quiet interest. She wasn't ready to share much about herself, but every small thing Caleb told her helped her understand him better. He wasn't a hunter. He wasn't a trader. He wasn't a man looking to gain something from her. He was simply a rancher who lived alone, carrying his own quiet pains. Hours passed peacefully until the sound of hooves echoed across the dry ground. Ayana stiffened instantly. The cup in her hand rattled against the wooden table. Caleb stood up, his expression turning serious. "Stay inside," he said calmly. "Don't come to the window." Ayana's heart pounded. She remembered the hunters' boots, their rough voices, their threats. She felt the same fear rise again. Fear that they had found her. Fear that Caleb would be forced to give her up. Caleb walked out to the front yard, closing the door behind him. Ayana moved to a corner of the cabin, covering her mouth with her hand so she wouldn't make any sound. Her breath trembled as she listened for voices outside. 3 men on horses approached the gate. Caleb recognized none of them, but their clothes, their saddles, and the expressions on their faces told him everything he needed to know. These men were not travelers. They were bounty hunters. "Morning," one of them called out. He had a bald head, a thick beard, and cold eyes that scanned every inch of the ranch. Caleb didn't return the smile. "What do you want?" "We're looking for someone," the man said. "An Apache girl, young. Ran away from us. We traced her tracks this way." Caleb kept his posture relaxed, but his voice stayed steady. "No one like that here." The second man leaned forward on his saddle. "Mind if we look around?" "We're sure she came this way." Caleb didn't hesitate. "Yes, I mind." The first man narrowed his eyes. "You refusing to let us search your land?" "I'm saying this is private property," Caleb replied. "And unless you have a warrant from the sheriff, you're not walking one step onto it." The tall man clicked his tongue in annoyance. "We're not trying to cause trouble, rancher. We just want what's ours." "She's not yours," Caleb said firmly. Inside the cabin, Ayana's heart raced. She pressed her hands against her chest to steady her breathing. She didn't know what was happening, but she recognized the tone of the hunters' voices. If they saw her, they would take her again. She knew that too well. Outside, the confrontation grew tense. The hunters seemed surprised Caleb refused them so boldly. Most people were too afraid to stand up to men like them. "Look," the bald man said, leaning forward in his saddle. "We don't want to get the law involved. Just let us search." Caleb didn't move from where he stood. "You're not going anywhere near my property." A long silence followed. Even the horses shifted uncomfortably. The hunters exchanged looks, clearly annoyed by the unexpected resistance. Then the bald man spoke again, his tone colder. "You're making a mistake, rancher. We'll be back. Workin' line. The manic line. Accidum. Workin' line 70 Wellum. Workin' line. Workin' line 70 Wellum. Accidum. Workin' line 70 well. Accidum. Accidum." Caleb didn't reply. He didn't threaten them. He simply stood his ground until the men finally turned their horses around and rode off. Dust rising behind them. When their figures disappeared over the hill, Caleb let out a slow breath and walked back to the cabin. He opened the door quietly. Ayana was standing near the wall, her eyes wide with fear and disbelief. "They came," she whispered. "Yes," Caleb said gently. "They asked for me," she said, her voice shaking. Caleb nodded once. "They won't get you." Ayana stared at him, overwhelmed. You told them no? You stood up to them?" Caleb shrugged lightly. "It wasn't hard. You're not theirs, and they had no right to be here." She looked at him as if she didn't understand how a person like him existed. All her life she had seen people stay silent in front of men like those hunters. Yet Caleb had spoken without fear, without hesitation. "You risked yourself," she said quietly. Caleb shook his head. "I did what was right. Anyone decent would." Ayana lowered her eyes. "Not everyone is decent." She walked slowly to the chair and sat down, trembling slightly. Caleb handed her a cup of water. She accepted it with both hands, trying to calm herself. For several moments, neither spoke. The cabin felt heavier now, filled with a mix of danger and something else, something new between them. Trust. Fragile, but real. You should leave, Ayanna said suddenly. Her voice was soft but full of fear. Those men will come back. They don't stop. They will hurt you. Caleb shook his head firmly. I'm not leaving. And I'm not letting them take you. But why? She whispered, almost desperate for an answer. Because no one deserves what they did to you, he replied. And because I know you're not safe out there alone. Ayanna covered her face with her hands. She didn't cry loudly. She didn't even sob, but her shoulders shook with the quiet grief she had carried for too long. Caleb didn't move closer. He didn't touch her. He just let her release the weight she had held inside. When she finally lowered her hands, her eyes were damp, but calmer. She looked at Caleb not with fear, but with a mixture of sadness and gratitude. Caleb spoke gently. Whatever comes next, we'll face it. You're not alone. Ayanna studied him for a long moment. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe those words. Outside, the wind carried the fading sound of horse tracks. Trouble hadn't ended, but Ayanna was no longer a prisoner, and Caleb was no longer just a stranger. Something fragile and strong had begun to grow between them, something that made both of their quiet lives change forever, and neither of them could turn back now. The days that followed the hunter's visit passed slowly, but not peacefully. Ayanna remained inside the cabin most of the time, but she watched Caleb through the window whenever he worked outside. She studied the way he moved, the way he fixed things calmly, the way he looked across the land with a thoughtful expression. His quiet strength made her feel safer than any walls could, and though she still felt fear deep inside her heart, something else had begun to grow beside it, a small belief that maybe, just maybe, she was no longer alone. Caleb tried to act as naturally as he could. He didn't want her to feel watched or controlled. He repaired the fence, fed the animals, and checked the land each morning. But even as he worked, he didn't forget the tracks he had seen. Someone had brought Ayanna to his fence. Someone had done it on purpose, and those men had not gone away for good. He could sense it. Inside the cabin, Ayanna tried each day to push her strength to return. Even simple tasks made her tired at first. When she cooked or swept the floor, her hands would shake. When she walked across the room, her legs felt weak. But she forced herself to try, because she didn't want to be helpless. She didn't want Caleb to think she was someone who needed saving again and again. One morning, while Caleb worked on a broken fence rail outside, Ayanna stepped into the small patch of sunlight near the doorway. She held onto the frame with one hand. The light felt warm on her face, and she breathed in the fresh air slowly, as if tasting something she had been denied for too long. Caleb turned at the soft sound of her steps and smiled slightly. "You're up early. I want to help," she said quietly. "You're still recovering," he reminded her. "I'm stronger today," she insisted. Her voice wasn't loud or confident, but it was steady. Caleb didn't argue, but he also didn't hand her anything heavy. Instead, he gave her a small task. "Can you hand me those nails on the barrel?" She nodded and walked slowly toward the barrel. Her steps were careful but determined. When she picked up the nails and passed them to him, he saw a hint of pride in her eyes, small but unmistakable. For a moment they worked side by side. She watched his hands as he hammered the rail into place. There was no rush in his movements, no frustration. He worked with patience. The same patience he showed her. She admired that in silence. Later that afternoon, a sudden pain struck her chest. Not physical pain, but a memory, her brother and sister. She had escaped to look for them. She didn't know where they were now. Every day she didn't search felt like a day she was failing them. The thought weighed on her more and more. That evening, while Caleb prepared dinner, she finally spoke. "My siblings, they're out there somewhere." Caleb looked up, giving her his full attention. "You mentioned them before," he said gently. "They were hiding when the men came to our camp," she whispered. "I told them to run. I don't know where they went. They could be scared, hungry, alone." Caleb set the wooden spoon down. He didn't rush to answer. But when he did, his voice was warm. "We can look for them." Ayana's eyes widened. "You would help me find them?" "Of course," he said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She felt heat sting behind her eyes, but she blinked quickly, not wanting to cry again. "You don't know them. You don't even know me." "I know enough," he answered. "You care about them, and no one should look for their family alone." Silence filled the room. Heavy, but soft. She stared at him, unable to find the right words. No one outside her tribe had ever offered help without wanting something. Caleb's kindness felt like a gift she didn't know how to accept. That night, when Caleb stepped outside to check the animals, Ayana watched him from the doorway again. The moon was gentle in the sky, casting silver light across the land. When he walked back toward the cabin, she stepped aside to let him in. But when he passed her, she spoke quietly. "You are different." Caleb turned slightly, surprised. "Different how?" "You help people," she said. "You don't ask for anything." He looked at her with a softness that reached his eyes. "Sometimes, people help because it's the right thing, Ayana. Not because they want something back." Her heart fluttered at his words, not in romance but in deep relief. Relief that a person like him existed. The following day, Ayana felt strong enough to help more. She walked outside for longer. Though she stuck close to the cabin, she gathered small pieces of firewood, plucked herbs she recognized near the creek, and cleaned the dishes when Caleb finished eating. Caleb tried to stop her at first, but she insisted gently, "Let me do something. It makes me feel alive." One afternoon, she noticed Caleb holding his shoulder and wincing slightly after lifting a heavy wooden post. Without thinking, she hurried over. "Sit. Let me look." Caleb laughed softly. "I'm fine." "No," she said with rare firmness. "You helped me. Let me help you." Caleb, surprised by her tone, allowed her to guide him to a chair. She pressed lightly along his shoulder and neck. Her touch was cautious, respectful, but certain. She recognized the tension instantly. "Your muscles are tight. You've been working too much." "Comes with ranch life," he said lightly. She shook her head and fetched herbs she had gathered earlier. She crushed them with a stone and mixed them with warm water to make a simple herbal paste. When she placed it gently on his shoulder, Caleb inhaled sharply at the cool sensation. "That's surprisingly good." Ayana smiled faintly. "My mother taught me many things." "Your mother was wise," Caleb replied. Ayana's smile faded at the memory, but she didn't withdraw. She kept applying the herbal mix until the pain eased. Caleb studied her as she worked, not with curiosity, but with respect. She was strong, thoughtful, and skilled in ways he hadn't expected. When she finished, she stepped back. "It will hurt less tomorrow." "Thank you," Caleb said sincerely. That simple exchange deepened something between them, something built not from words, but from quiet understanding and shared strength. Days passed, and with each one, Ayana grew stronger. She no longer hid when Caleb stepped outside. She stood beside him sometimes, asking questions about the land or about his childhood. Caleb answered each question with a calm voice and a small smile, happy to see her growing more confident. But even as things improved, danger still hovered quietly. Caleb could feel it. The hunters had not gone away. They would return, not for peace, but for control. Ayana sensed it too. Every time she heard distant hooves, her heart tightened. She tried not to let Caleb see her fear, but he always noticed. One evening, as they sat by the warm fire inside the cabin, Caleb spoke. "When you're ready, we'll go look for your siblings. But we have to be careful. Those men might still be nearby." Ayana nodded slowly. "I don't want you hurt because of me." Caleb met her gaze. "You didn't bring trouble here, Ayana. Trouble came because someone did something wrong to you. That's not your fault." She swallowed hard, touched by how gently he said it. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe she deserved safety. And for the first time, She felt hope not small and fragile, but real, strong, growing inside her like a seed finally given light. She did not know what the future held. She didn't know when the hunters would come back, or how dangerous they would be. But she knew one thing clearly. She and Caleb would face whatever came together. And together, they were stronger than she had ever been alone. The morning was peaceful, but both Caleb and Ayanna felt something different in the air. It wasn't the wind or the sky. It was a quiet heaviness, as if the land itself was waiting for something to happen. Ayanna stood near the cabin door, watching Caleb saddle his horse. Today they planned to ride out and look for any signs of her younger siblings. Ayanna felt nervous, but she also felt ready. She had rested. She had eaten. And her strength had returned, more than she expected. Caleb tightened the saddle straps and gave the horse a gentle pat. When he looked at her, he saw determination in her eyes mixed with worry. "We don't have to go far today," he said. "Just a small search. We'll take it slow." Ayanna nodded. "I want to try. Even if we find nothing today, at least we are looking." Caleb admired her courage. She had come from fear and exhaustion to strength and purpose. He helped her onto the horse, keeping his hand steady so she felt safe. She sat upright, holding the saddle horn with steady hands. Caleb mounted behind her since they only had one horse strong enough for the rough trails. Ayanna didn't flinch. She trusted him now. Not with blind faith, but with quiet understanding. As they rode away from the ranch, the land stretched before them, endless, open, full of secrets. Ayanna scanned the horizon, searching for any sign her siblings might have left. Footprints, broken branches, smoke from a small fire. Anything. Caleb let her lead the direction, guiding the horse where she pointed. "We used to camp by those trees," she said softly, pointing to a cluster of tall pines. "My mother taught us to find water nearby. My brother loved the sound of running streams." Caleb followed her gaze. "We'll check the creek," he said. They rode for an hour. The creek was quiet. Only the soft trickle of water and the chirping of birds. Ayanna knelt beside the water, touching the smooth stones. "If they came through here, they would stop to drink," she said. Caleb studied the ground nearby. He had a rancher's eye, sharp, experienced. He noticed a small footprint near the edge of the water. "Ayanna," he called gently. "Look here." She hurried over and her breath caught. The footprint was small. Far smaller than Caleb's. Smaller than hers. A child's footprint. Her heart tightened with hope and fear. "This could be my sister," she whispered. She looked around desperately. Where did they go? Did they hide? Were they taken? Caleb crouched beside her. "The ground slopes toward the canyon," he said. "If they were scared, they might have gone somewhere with cover." Ayanna stood slowly. "Then we go to the canyon." They rode another hour until they reached the cliffs that marked the canyon. It wasn't deep, but it was wide, lined with scattered bushes and rocks large enough for children to hide behind. Ayanna's chest tightened with every step the horse took. When they reached the mouth of the canyon, Caleb dismounted and helped Ayanna down. She walked carefully, listening for any sound. Caleb scanned the land again, searching for movement. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then Ayanna froze. She lifted her hand, signaling Caleb to stop. "Listen," she whispered. They heard it, a faint rustling behind a group of rocks. Not the sound of wind, something alive, something small. Ayanna hesitated, afraid it might not be who she hoped. Caleb placed a gentle hand on her arm. "Go slow," he whispered. "Call them." Ayanna stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Lena? Tahoe? It's me. It's Ayanna." Silence followed. Then a small voice echoed back, weak and frightened. "Sister," Ayanna gasped. "Lena," she cried, running toward the rocks. Two small figures appeared, thin, trembling, covered in dust. A little girl with tangled hair and wide, frightened eyes, and a younger boy clutching her arm. The moment they saw Ayanna, They sprinted into her arms, crying softly. Ayanna knelt and held them tightly, pressing her face to their hair. "You're safe," she whispered again and again. "You're safe now." Caleb watched quietly from a few steps away. His heart softened at the sight. He knew this reunion meant everything to her. Ayanna helped her siblings stand. "This is Caleb," she told them. "He helped me. He saved me." The children looked at Caleb with nervous eyes. He knelt down so he didn't tower over them. "You're safe here," he said gently. "No one will hurt you." Lena nodded slowly, still gripping Ayanna's hand. Her little brother hid behind her, peeking at Caleb cautiously. But they both sensed he meant no harm. Ayanna turned to Caleb. "We need to get them to the cabin. They need food. They need rest." Caleb nodded. "Let's get them home." He lifted Lena carefully onto the horse and helped Ayanna hold the younger boy in front of her. Then he mounted behind them again. The children leaned against Ayanna, drawing comfort from her warmth. As they rode back, Caleb noticed Ayanna wiping tears from her cheeks, but they were tears of relief, not fear. When they reached the cabin, Ayanna brought the children inside and helped them drink water and eat small pieces of bread. Caleb warmed soup over the fire, filling the room with a comforting smell. The children ate slowly at first, then faster once their hunger took over. Later, when they were resting on the bed, Ayanna stepped outside with Caleb. The evening light painted the land in soft gold. She stood quietly beside him, hands folded in front of her. "You gave me back my family," she said softly. "I don't know how to repay you." "You don't need to repay me," Caleb replied. Ayanna looked down at her hands. "I thought I had lost them forever." Caleb's voice was gentle. "You were brave enough to keep looking for them. I only helped." Before either of them could speak again, the sound of hooves thundered across the land. Ayanna stiffened immediately. Caleb turned toward the sound, eyes narrowing. The bounty hunters were back. 3 of them rode directly toward the ranch, dust rising behind them. Caleb stepped forward, calm but alert. Ayanna moved behind him. Keeping one hand on the door to the cabin where her siblings slept, the hunters approached the gate. This time they did not pretend to be polite. The bald man glared at Caleb. "We said we'd be back," he growled. "You have something that belongs to us." Caleb didn't flinch. "She belongs to no one." The second man pointed sharply. "Move aside." Caleb didn't move. "You're not entering my land." A tense silence filled the air. Ayanna watched, terrified that Caleb might get hurt because of her. But then, something unexpected happened. 2 riders approached from behind the hunters, the sheriff and one of his deputies. The sheriff raised his hand. "That's far enough," he ordered. The bounty hunters stiffened. "We've had reports," the sheriff continued, "that you've been chasing people illegally, taking them without proper warrants, and treating them cruelly. You're under arrest until we sort out the truth," the hunters argued, but the sheriff didn't listen. Within minutes, they were handcuffed and taken away. Dust settled slowly after their horses disappeared into the distance. Ayanna released a long breath she didn't know she had been holding. Caleb turned to her. "It's over," he said gently. "They won't bother you again." Ayanna's shoulders relaxed for the first time in weeks. She walked closer to him, her eyes soft with gratitude. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. For being the man who chose kindness when you had no reason to." Caleb shook his head lightly. Anyone would have helped. Ayanna smiled for the first time since he met her, small, warm, real. "Not anyone," she said. "But you did." Days later, when her siblings were strong again, Ayanna prepared to return to her tribe. But she didn't leave in fear. She left with hope, strength, and a promise. Before she rode away, she stood before Caleb. Neither spoke at first. There were no words big enough to express what they had shared. Finally, Ayanna said, "My people will remember you. I will remember you. You changed our lives." Caleb watched her with calm eyes. "Take care of them," he said softly. "And take care of yourself." She nodded once, deeply, Then she mounted her horse with her siblings beside her. As they rode across the land, away from the ranch, Ayanna turned back one last time. Caleb stood outside his cabin, watching them leave not with sadness, but with quiet pride. He had not only freed her, he had helped her rebuild her life. And Ayanna carried that kindness with her, stronger than any chain, stronger than any fear, guiding her toward a new future.